Welcome to the Victorian hair salon, where pomade was straight up pig fat, curls came with a side of smoke damage, and wigs had more dirt than your nosy neighbour. It's a world of flaming tongs, poisonous powders, and hairstyles that doubled as crime scenes. Come on in, and remember, hair grows back, usually. If you enjoy drifting off to sleep to strange and wonderful bits of history, be sure to like and subscribe. This episode is part of our Victorian series, a cosy collection of bedtime stories exploring the most bizarre and beautiful sides of 19th century life. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something oddly comforting about knowing we're all falling asleep to tales of vanity, danger, and just a touch of arsenic. Now dim the lights, get cozy, and let yourself drift off as we step into a world where beauty required bravery, and a good hairstyle might haunt you forever. You've been scrubbing floors since dawn and stitching sleeves until your fingers cramped, but today's wages are clutched tightly in your gloved hand and you're about to spend the entire lot on hair. The small bell jingles as you step into Miss Prattle's parlour of pomades, curls and corrections, where the air is so thick with burnt lard and rosewater you half expect to see your lungs give up and walk out without you. All around you, women are packed into chairs like sardines in corsets, some with their heads tilted back over porcelain basins, others stiff as corpses while their curls are tortured into ringlets with irons that look freshly stolen from a blacksmith's forge. The woman next to you mutters a prayer as her stylist approaches with tongs glowing red. "We only lost one ear this week," the stylist chirps. You're not sure if she's joking. Your own treatment begins with a cleansing tonic that smells suspiciously like gin gone bad. It's followed by a generous application of pomade so greasy you're fairly certain it just blinked. Then come the hot tongs, heated over open flame and waved far too close to your scalp. You try to relax, you fail. Somewhere behind you, something catches fire, and nobody even flinches. Just another Tuesday in Victorian hair care. Despite the horror, these salons were a lifeline, especially for working women. Victorian society was viciously visual, and a tidy coiffure could mean the difference between employment and rejection, admiration or insult. Hair wasn't just hair, it was moral character. Clean curls equaled decency. Dishevelled locks, moral decay. And so, women starved themselves of meals to pay for curls that might hold for 2 days if the fog didn't roll in. The tools were medieval. Curling irons heated on gas jets or coals, pomades made of pig fat, bear grease, or whatever was left in the butcher's bin. In 1862, the Illustrated London News dryly warned, "Ladies should be cautious when operating the curling iron amid lively conversation, as distraction has led many a fair lock to fiery ruin." One seamstress later recalled in a letter, "I paid twopence for curls and left with a welt down my neck, but I walked home proud, shining like a roast goose." And yet, beyond the burns and grease, salons were where women gathered to trade gossip, scan fashion magazines, and daydream of silk dresses. They couldn't afford. It wasn't just about looking like a lady. It was about feeling like one, even if just for an hour, even if you smelled like stewed sheep. But if you think a little scorched scalp was bad, just wait until you learn what Victorians did with other people's hair, because next we're stepping into the world of false pads, switch pieces and wigs, some of which had more secrets than the women wearing them. You think the worst is behind you. The scorching tongs, the pomade that smelled like meat drippings, the stylist who burned her own apron and didn't seem to care. You survived all that, and now she's asking if you'd like to add a little volume. You nod, because why not? You've already sacrificed your dignity and a layer of scalp. What's the harm in a little volume? That's when she pulls out what looks like a Victorian roadkill collection. Tangled clumps of human hair, horsehair, and something that might once have been a raccoon. She smiles and says, "Don't worry, love. This one's clean, mostly." Within minutes, your head is being carefully built into a top-heavy architectural masterpiece using stuffing, netting, pins, and what might be a small wire bird cage. You're not sure if you're being styled or constructed. From the corner of the room, a girl whispers, "It's beautiful," as if watching a religious ceremony. You can't nod in thanks. Your neck can no longer support the weight. By the late 1800s, Victorian women had developed a near-spiritual obsession with hair volume. But unlike today's mousse and blow-dry routines, this volume came from extra hair, often harvested, purchased or stolen. Wigs, pads, and switches, long plaits that could be clipped in, were all the rage. Some were made from horsehair, but the most sought-after pieces were made of real human hair, often bought from desperately poor women, or, as the Times reported in 1872, sourced from the heads of sleeping maidservants whose braids were cut and sold by unscrupulous house thieves. These additions were stuffed into styles like the Apollo knot or Grecian roll, which required so much padding that women often suffered neck pain and headaches, or, in one poor woman's case, a mild concussion when she nodded too enthusiastically at a ball. She later wrote in the lady's own paper, "The roll slipped and struck me about the temple. I retired early, claiming an upset stomach, though it was truly the hair that felled me." Hairpieces were often kept in drawers or under glass domes at home, brushed carefully and reperfumed each week. But when hair rats, small bundles of shed hair saved and reused for padding, weren't cleaned properly, they became havens for lice, mould, and even mice. Yes, mice. With one 1883 Leeds Mercury article describing a startled young woman who discovered a family of pink-eyed squatters nesting in her topknot. Still, a well-built hairpiece could mean the difference between social invisibility and admiration. Women wore other women's hair to climb the ladder of fashion, quite literally, and no one dared ask whose head it came from. But of course, it wasn't just your hair being dressed in these salons. Your face would be next, rouged, powdered, plucked and polished. Even if the products used could peel paint off a carriage, you're still in the salon chair, afraid to sneeze in case your mountain of hair padding collapses and kills a nearby child. You've survived the bear grease, the flaming tongs, and the Victorian updo that doubled as a neck workout. But just when you think you're in the clear, your stylist pulls out a small ceramic jar and says the words every woman dreads, "Let's brighten your complexion." You nod, because that seems safer than running. She dips her fingers into a paste that looks like mashed chalk and smells like old spoons. With zero warning, she begins to smear it across your face like she's buttering a crumpet. You try to breathe through your mouth. You regret that decision instantly. "There," she beams. "Now we'll finish with just a touch of powder." She proceeds to empty a Victorian flour sack onto your head. A small dust cloud rises. The woman next to you coughs. The room is now one flickering gas lamp away from a mining explosion. Then comes the rouge, applied in thick, terrifying circles that make you look less like a blushing maiden and more like a clown preparing for emotional combat. Finally, she picks up what appears to be a lump of coal and attacks your eyebrows with it like she's mad at them. When it's all over, she spins the mirror around. You stare at your reflection. It's you. But if you had survived a gas leak and were now haunting the manor, you try to smile. The cream cracks. "Stunning," she says. "Blinding, you say, pardon?" Nothing. Cosmetics in the Victorian era were a complicated business, both literally and chemically. On the surface, the ideal was natural beauty, but this didn't stop women from slathering their faces in mixtures that would later be banned by multiple governments. Face powders often contained lead carbonate, while skin whiteners were laced with mercury, and lip stains included carmine, a dye extracted from crushed beetles, or sometimes coal tar. A woman might read in The Queen, the ladies' newspaper, that pale skin denoted purity and refinement, then rush to apply a cream marketed as Madame Rachel's enamel, which promised a youthful glow and delivered instead a long-term decline in kidney function. In 1863, the Times published a warning about rouge of dubious composition being sold at market stalls, noting that it renders the user ruddy not with health, but with irritation and frequently swelling. First-hand accounts confirm this. One 1890 letter from a milliner's assistant recounted how she wore the powder all day for a wedding and came home pink, puffy and blind in one eye from the fumes. But the risk was worth it, or at least endurable, because beauty was currency. A fresh face might win favour with an employer, draw attention from a suitor, or simply allow a woman to walk down the street without being called coarse. And within the buzzing walls of a hair salon, these toxic tonics were part of the ritual. The final polish on a transformation that made the outside world forget your cracked boots and second-hand dress. Still, it wasn't just powders and pomades being applied in salons. Secrets were too. Because once the chairs were full and the doors were shut, the real entertainment began, in whispers, in winks, and in very carefully phrased insults. You're not sure if you're in a salon or a courtroom, but the drama is delicious. You came in for a curl and a dab of rouge, and now you're sitting in the middle of what can only be described as a high society meltdown disguised as a beauty treatment. Pinned under a giant hairdryer that sounds like a haunted accordion, you have no choice but to sit, sweat, and eavesdrop. And oh, the things you are learning. One woman, 3 chairs down, is weeping into her cape because her daughter ran off with a chimney sweep. Another is claiming, loudly, that her sister's husband's cousin has been seen frequenting a known jam shop after dark, which, judging by the gasps, is apparently filthy. Across from you, 2 matrons are whispering so loudly they may as well use a megaphone. She says it's her natural colour, but we all know her maid buys that dye from the apothecary near the docks. The accused is sitting 10 feet away and pretending to read a fashion magazine while gripping it like it personally insulted her hat. Your stylist leans in, pretending to adjust your curl, and mutters, "That one's had 3 husbands and not a funeral between them." You nearly fall out of the chair from glee. There's hot air blowing on your scalp, lead paint hardening on your cheeks, and bare grease leaking down the back of your neck. You're physically melting, but socially you have never felt more alive. Victorian hair salons were more than just beauty parlours. They were unofficial confessionals, amateur intelligence agencies, and full-time rumour mills. Once inside, class boundaries blurred just enough for secrets to leak like overboiled puddings. The act of having one's hair curled or face painted loosened tongues the way brandy might at a dinner party, and the result was a steady trickle of gossip, scandal, and whispered vengeance. In an 1881 article in the London Figaro, a stylist was quoted saying, "A lady will say to me what she will not admit to her clergyman." I have heard secrets that would rattle Parliament. Meanwhile, the letters of a fashionable Brighton beautician reveal how she was bribed with silk gloves and French perfume, not to repeat who was seen entering a backroom tryst at the Clarendon Hotel. Salon employees became reluctant keepers of reputations, or occasionally their destroyers. It was not uncommon for rival women to schedule overlapping appointments, purely to observe each other's wrinkles, hair loss, or changes in scent. One woman, writing anonymously to the Ladies' World, described a salon brawl in which Mrs. Ainsworth accused Mrs. Featherstone's powder of containing chalkboard dust, and was answered with a comb hurled like a dagger. These were not quiet places of self-care, they were battlegrounds, war zones armed with hairpins and verbal grenades, and if you were lucky, and smart, you could leave with perfect curls and a full update on who was pregnant, who was bankrupt, and who was secretly wearing hairpieces from the deceased. But the salon wasn't just a place for gossip, it was also where entrepreneurial chaos thrived. Because in the back rooms and side drawers, stylists were peddling miracle tonics, eyebrow elixirs, and treatments so strange they might as well have been brewed by witches. You're halfway through your appointment and feeling like a new woman, assuming that new woman is slowly being cooked from the scalp outward and smells faintly of varnish. You should leave. You meant to leave. But then your stylist says the 4 most dangerous words in the Victorian beauty world. We sell products too. Before you can fake a fainting spell, she's dragging a wooden crate out from beneath the counter, like she's revealing sacred treasure. Inside are rows of tiny glass bottles, each labelled in the kind of cursive only found on gravestones or lawsuits. You pick one up. Madame Esmeralda's elixir for eyebrow brilliance and marital harmony. Sure, why not? Another promises to fortify the lashes and increase emotional purity, which is definitely not how eyelashes work. There's a jar of bust-firming jelly that smells like spoiled eggnog and regret. A paste labelled complexion cement that rattles when you shake it. A tonic with a picture of a goat and no further explanation. Your stylist swears by it. Took my cousin's moustache clean off. You buy 2, you pay an entire week's wages and leave with a bag full of mystery goo, a forehead that tingles ominously, and the growing suspicion that your eyebrows may never grow back evenly again. Victorian salons didn't just provide questionable services, they sold deeply questionable products. And because beauty was seen as a moral obligation, women were endlessly targeted with tonics, creams, lotions, pills, and powders that promised everything from elegance to eternal youth. The problem? Most of them worked about as well as rubbing your face on a doorknob. Cosmetic advertisements made ridiculous claims with complete impunity. One product, Dr. Rose's Liquid Bloom, promised a face like fine porcelain and was later found to contain ammonia, lead, and a pigment once used to paint barn doors. The hair revivifier of Madame Montague claimed to resurrect even the most listless follicles and was rumoured to be made of beef drippings, rum, and prayers. A popular 1875 publication, Hints for the Toilette, warned readers not to trust unscrupulous vendors hawking eyebrow enhancers and eye washes, known to cause swelling, discoloration, or spontaneous tears. The Daily Telegraph even reported on a lawsuit involving a woman who used a fashionable cold cream and awoke with the complexion of a boiled ham. Still, women bought them in droves. To skip your salon tonic was to risk being noticed, and in Victorian society to be noticed for the wrong reason could doom your social standing faster than a crooked hemline. Whether it was a lash water, a nose slimming salve, or a tonic said to restore youthful innocence, whatever that means, it all sold. Because looking good wasn't just an option. It was survival, and it wasn't just grown women being slathered in lard and lightning water, because as you're about to discover, in the back corner of every proper salon sat a small, uncomfortable chair, reserved for the littlest victims of Victorian beauty culture. You're quietly sipping the last of your free salon tea, which tastes suspiciously like boiled celery water, when you hear the shriek. Not a grown woman, number that was a child. You turn your head, carefully so your hair scaffolding doesn't collapse, and sure enough, there's a small girl in petticoats and patent leather shoes being held hostage in the children's chair. She's about 6, possibly 7 if you count the rage in her eyes. The stylist is trying to coax her into staying still with a peppermint sweet and a threat. "We're just curling the fringe, darling," she says. "You'll never take me alive," the girl replies, kicking her mother in the shin. It's like watching a tiny Victorian general refuse to surrender to France. Eventually she is subdued with a biscuit and a promise of pony-related bribery. The curling begins. So does the crying. Somewhere in the distance you hear a jar of rouge shatter, and another child scream the word arsenic. You pretend not to hear it and sip your celery tea in silence. Victorian salons didn't just cater to women, they catered to their heirs. And in a society obsessed with appearances and class signals, even small children were not spared from the torments of fashion. Girls as young as 3 were brought in for curled ringlets, carefully brushed brows, lemon juice skin bleaching, and even miniature manicures involving cuticle scissors the size of sewing needles. Salon advertisements from the 1880s frequently featured lines like, "Now offering mother-daughter beautification sessions and promised genteel manners and curls that hold through Sunday service." One French-born stylist in Mayfair was known for hosting little lady afternoons, where girls sat in velvet chairs while their hair was scalded into submission and were rewarded with candied violets, if they didn't scream. One account published in the Family Herald in 1879 described a fashionable mother boasting that her 5-year-old never leaves the house without a touch of cheek colour and violet-scented powder, lest she be mistaken for the help. And the London-based Court Journal featured a letter from a governess who was horrified to find her young charge scheduled for a brow thinning on the grounds that her natural shape was too heavy for good breeding. Boys were less frequently subjected to salon visits, though upper-class sons were sometimes brought in for pomade and moral judgment. But for girls, beauty began early and painfully. To be plain was to be pitied. To be unkempt was to be shamed. And to be 7 years old with a soft, natural curl. Absolutely unacceptable. But times were changing. A new force was rising in the world of Victorian beauty. One with scissors, flair, and very dramatic facial hair. That's right. The male hairdresser had entered the salon, and not everyone was thrilled about it. You're in the chair again, because apparently you live here now, when a sudden hush falls over the salon. Brushes pause mid-air, a hot tongue trembles slightly in its flame. Even the shrieking child in the corner stops chewing on her own bonnet string. He has arrived. The door swings open with just enough drama to suggest rehearsal. In walks a man wearing a silk cravat, a waistcoat embroidered with hairpins, and the kind of moustache that looks like it should be feeding pigeons in a park. He carries a leather case like a surgeon on his way to perform cosmetic miracles, and by the look on the stylist's face, he might as well be royalty. The clients are spellbound. One woman whispers, "That's Monsieur Lucien." Another gasps and nearly drops her eyebrow pencil. The man himself surveys the room, nods as if giving silent approval to the wallpaper, and then beckons dramatically. "The next lady, please." You are the next lady. You rise slowly, unsure whether you're heading to a haircut or a duel. Victorian society had a complicated relationship with the male hairdresser. On one hand, they were fashionable, dramatic, and, in many cases, significantly better trained than their female counterparts. On the other hand, they were men, in a room full of corseted women, touching faces, applying powders, styling bangs. Scandalous! Originally, most upper-class women employed female maids to handle hair at home, but by mid-century, male stylists began to gain fame, particularly in urban salons that catered to aristocrats and actresses. The French stylist Alexandre de Paris became so well known he was nicknamed the Magician of Tresses. In London, stylists like Signor Ferroni and Monsieur Emile offered imported techniques, dramatic flair, and enough gossip to fuel a dinner party for weeks. Still, their presence was not without controversy. One letter to the Times in 1869 read, "I cannot understand how respectable ladies allow themselves to be powdered and prodded by strange men, however foreign and fashionable." Another woman, writing to the Queen, declared, "I would sooner go bald than be handled by a man in perfume." That sentiment was not universal. Many women adored the new breed of male stylists, especially those who came with French accents, flattering words, and the occasional discreet opinion on one's husband. Their salons became status symbols, and their work was whispered about in carriages and ballrooms. One client reportedly fainted after having her curls praised by a Parisian stylist named Claude. Whether it was the compliment or the pomade is still unclear, but behind the scenes, not all of these salons were as polished as they looked, because for every celebrated monsieur, there were a dozen dodgy backroom barbers slapping together tonics and curling irons with zero training and a dream made of soot and hope. And that brings us to the next chapter, where the wigs were lopsided, the powders homemade, and the police were very interested in what exactly you were putting on your face. You're here because Doris said this place was a hidden gem. Doris also once tried to cure her chilblains with brandy and prayer, so maybe you shouldn't have trusted her. Still, here you are, sitting in a chair that creaks like it's filing a complaint and staring into a mirror that's more fog than glass. The woman hovering behind you introduces herself as Dr. Lady Biddlesworth, which sounds impressive until you realise the certificate on the wall says Advanced Beautician Class of Honorary. Her diploma appears to be printed on butcher paper and smells faintly of ham. She offers you a complexion tonic in a reused jam jar. You ask what's in it. She winks and says, "Nature." That's not a reassuring answer, but you drink it anyway because you're too polite to decline and too poor to leave. Your left eyelid twitches immediately. You're told you'll receive the premium package, which includes a lash tint with what looks like chimney soot, a contouring facial massage, administered with a butter knife, and something called ear polish, which you do not ask about further. On the other side of the room, a woman is having her freckles removed with something that smells like turpentine and sounds like regret. A third customer, already mid-treatment, turns to you and whispers, "I came in for a manicure and now I speak French." At some point, someone's wig catches fire. No one reacts. You start mentally writing your obituary and sincerely hope they spell your name right. Unlicensed salons were rampant in Victorian cities, a result of booming demand for beauty services, lack of regulation, and the public's unshakable belief that if it tingles, it's working. These under-the-table operations offered everything from eyebrow darkening to wart removal, usually with ingredients that had no business near human skin. Popular treatments included arsenic wafers for skin clarity, yes, arsenic, DIY enamel face masks that hardened like cement, mercury-infused wrinkle creams, and lash stimulators made from ammonia, alcohol, and pure despair. In an 1877 exposé, the Pall Mall Gazette reported on a beauty house operating out of a coal merchant's back room, where clients were given hair tonics that left their scalps itching with righteous fury and eyebrow dye that turned hair blue. Another article in the Morning Advertiser described how a lady of good standing suffered a temporary loss of vision after applying a bargain face bleach sold by a woman in the fish market. Because licensing was practically non-existent, all it took to become a beautician was a comb, a confident tone, and preferably a cousin who could forge a certificate. These rogue salons thrived in back streets and above taverns, often doubling as gossip dens, fortune-telling rooms, or bootleg perfume shops. And while many women knew they were taking a risk, the lure of affordable beauty was too tempting to resist. After all, real salons were expensive, unlicensed ones were cheap, and only sometimes left you with blistered lips or eyelashes that buzzed. Small price to pay for charm. Still, not every salon was a disaster. Some were glamorous, gleaming, and frequented by the most famous faces in London. Because if you were lucky, wealthy, and willing to spend half your fortune on hair oil made from foreign nuts, You could book a chair in one of the city's celebrity salons, where fame, fashion, and far too much perfume collided in a haze of social climbing. You know you've stepped into a higher tax bracket because no one's heating curling tongs over a coal fire, and there isn't a single cat sitting on the combs. Instead, you're ushered through velvet curtains into a room that smells like imported florals and generational wealth. The chairs are cushioned, the mirrors are polished. The woman at the front desk calls you madame and offers you cucumber water, which you pretend to accept casually, even though you've never trusted a vegetable in a beverage before. Your stylist introduces herself as Mademoiselle Béatrice Dubouclet, which you strongly suspect is a stage name, but she says it while wearing elbow-length gloves and a scent that smells expensive enough to be illegal. You don't argue, you simply surrender your head like a minor royal offering tribute. You're not asked what you want, you're told what your hair needs, your scalp is dabbed with tonic from a cut glass bottle that could double as a crown jewel. You nod solemnly, and try to ignore the growing suspicion that your boots alone have lowered the property value of the entire salon. To your left, a countess is demanding a more spiritual curl. To your right, an opera singer is describing her rival's split ends with the drama of a courtroom confession. You're surrounded by diamonds, egos, and enough perfume to stun a horse, and for the first time in your life, your hair is being taken very seriously. By the late Victorian era, celebrity salons had taken hold of London's elite. Ornate, expensive, and as much about reputation as ringlets. To have your hair styled at Bélanger's of Bond Street or Madame Volant's parlour for the particular lady was a social marker on par with being seen at the opera or getting invited to a duchess's funeral, preferably someone else's. High society salons catered to actresses, aristocrats, and wealthy women with more gossip than sense. Stylists gained cult followings, published beauty columns in the papers, and made public appearances with the flair of opera singers. One famous London hairdresser, known simply as Auguste, reportedly arrived at clients' homes with a valet, a perfume atomizer, and a monogrammed curling iron. These salons often had private rooms, personal attendants, and back exits for clients involved in delicate situations. One socialite was said to have been ushered into a salon's confession chair after being seen at the theatre in last season's Hairstyle, an event that nearly caused a duel. The Ladies' Gazette recounted how one ambitious debutante had a 6-hour appointment involving 17 different hairpieces and a powdered wig so tall it disrupted gaslight. But the pressure was immense. Looking perfect came at the cost of time, money, and occasionally physical stability. In 1887, the Morning Post reported on an heiress whose hair frame collapsed during a curtsy, striking the floorboards and exposing 2 false braids and an emergency bottle of smelling salts. It was beautiful, it was ridiculous, and above all, it was fashion. But as with all high society experiments, not everything went according to plan, because when your hair becomes an engineering project, sometimes it fails, and when it does, it usually fails in public. You're at a party, a proper one. String quartet, flickering gaslight, the scent of expensive candle wax and generational shame. You're standing under a chandelier the size of a small carriage, engaged in polite conversation with a baroness who may or may not be drunk on sherry and spite. You smile, you nod, and you feel a shift, a subtle tilt, a quiet rebellion at the top of your skull. Your elaborate chignon, which took 3 hours, 12 hairpins, and the emotional strength of 2 stylists to assemble, is moving. You panic internally. Externally, you sip punch like a duchess unbothered by the laws of gravity, but then comes the sound. A tiny metallic plink as the first hairpin hits the marble floor, then another. You attempt to casually press your hand to your head, but it's too late. Your bun has become a rogue satellite. A braid detaches, your fringe slips. Someone gasps. A child points. A man retrieves what used to be the back of your hair and hands it to you like he's just found a feral wig in the wild. You dropped this, he says gently, as if returning a glove and not your dignity. You nod. You curtsy. You back out of the ballroom like a disgraced ballerina. Behind you, your former hairstyle is still lying on the floor like the ghost of better days. By the late Victorian period, hairstyles had become gravity-defying feats of engineering, supported by false braids, pads, wireframes, hair rats, glue, and more optimism than physics. But when things went wrong, and they did frequently, the results were memorable, sometimes catastrophic, and often public. Newspapers of the time delighted in reporting beauty failures. In 1889, the Illustrated Police News published a front-page sketch of a woman whose towering coiffure caught fire from a nearby chandelier. A mass of flaming curls, the article declared, brought the assembly to chaos. The woman reportedly extinguished herself by plunging into the punch bowl. Another story from the Times in 1874 described an heiress whose elaborate hair cage gave way mid-curtsy at a ball, flinging hairpins like shrapnel and revealing a bun stuffed with cotton, string, and someone else's braid. She was escorted out by 2 footmen and 1 large hat. In private letters, women confessed to losing entire wigs while sneezing, being chased by small dogs attracted to bear grease pomade, or finding that their fringe had quietly slipped down their forehead during a particularly humid dinner party. One debutante's curl structure allegedly collapsed after being hugged too enthusiastically by the Prince of Wales. She fainted. He applauded. And yet the risk of hair-based embarrassment did little to stop the trend. If anything, it heightened the pressure to maintain appearance and composure, no matter how many pieces of you were pinned in place. Because the salon didn't just sell beauty, it sold the performance of elegance. And in order to perform properly, you had to follow the rules. Enter the next topic, Victorian salon etiquette, where sighing too loudly, sitting too low, or asking for a refund could get you permanently uninvited. You've arrived precisely on time for your salon appointment, which is already a problem. In Victorian salon culture, arriving exactly on the hour means you're poor, desperate, or French. The truly refined arrive 15 minutes late, and apologise with a soft laugh that suggests they've just come from a better engagement, or possibly a séance. You remove your gloves and sit down, only to be met with the unmistakable glance of another client who clearly believes you've taken her chair. She says nothing. She doesn't have to. The weight of her disapproval is now resting squarely on your spine like an anvil made of judgment and lace. You cross your ankles, hands in lap, eyes down. Don't speak first, don't scratch, don't breathe too enthusiastically. A sneeze is social death. You attempt to smile at the stylist who's already 20 minutes behind and styling someone else's hair with the speed of a sloth on laudanum. You don't complain, you don't even frown. You simply exist in silence, like a statue that tips well. Congratulations, you're now playing Victorian salon etiquette on hard mode. Victorian salons weren't just beauty parlours, they were performance spaces. And every woman who entered was expected to follow a complicated choreography of manners, glances, and strategically timed sighs. Clients were expected to arrive fashionably late, but not so late as to appear disrespectful. Speak softly or not at all unless directly addressed. Never question the stylist's choices no matter what they glued to your scalp. And most importantly, never show discomfort, even while being poked, pricked, scalded, or accidentally lit on fire. According to an 1872 column in the Lady's Mirror, a refined woman will suffer quietly and praise the process, even when the eyebrow pencil scratches too deep or the curling tongs emit a troubling hiss. Another etiquette manual warned against showing too much satisfaction with one's own reflection, as it suggested vanity, which was considered in poor taste, particularly when displayed by women who weren't duchesses. Even seating mattered. The closer you sat to the front window, the higher your social ranking. Being placed near the back room, or heaven forbid the mop bucket, was an unspoken declaration that you had fallen from grace, possibly due to scandal or poor hat storage. Stylists, too, had their own rules. They were to be friendly but never familiar, complimentary but not too complimentary, and under no circumstances were they to reveal what one client said about another, unless, of course, it was whispered in confidence and followed with, "But don't tell her I said so." This elaborate etiquette dance created an atmosphere where everyone smiled, no one trusted anyone, and judgment hovered in the air like powdered arsenic. And when someone did break the rules, spoke out of turn, complained about their curl, or, God forbid, asked for a refund, well, war broke out. Which brings us to the next chapter, salon rivalries and feuds, where seating was weaponized, gossip was currency, and one poorly timed eyebrow comment could ruin your entire season. You knew she'd be here. You knew it. You should have rescheduled. You should have feigned plague. But no. Here you are, sitting 6 feet from the woman who once told the vicar your updo looked a little rushed in front of everyone at last month's garden luncheon. She meets your gaze in the salon mirror. You smile with your mouth. She smiles with her teeth. A truce? Number, just mutual, high society loathing with a side of lavender oil. You both pretend to read magazines. You both pretend not to listen. You both definitely heard the stylist say one of you has fine, breakable hair, and you both assume it's the other. She coughs politely. You cough louder. She compliments the stylist's dress. You compliment her shoes. Game on. As the stylist begins brushing your curls, you speak just loud enough for her to hear. I do so admire women who aren't afraid to keep their natural grey. She flinches. A tiny victory. A battle won. But the war is far from over. Victorian salons were less like spas and more like gilded battlegrounds, where women engaged in full-contact social warfare disguised as casual conversation. The weapons, passive aggression, backhanded compliments, and the deadly art of performative indifference. According to an 1886 article in the Ladies' Companion, nothing reveals a woman standing more than her composure in the salon. If she maintains serenity while seated near her rival, she is a lady. If she flinches, she is finished. Salon rivalry was especially fierce in towns where society was small and memory was long. A poorly executed bun or the wrong shade of rouge could provide your enemies with weeks of conversational ammunition, and if you sat in the best chair, though, the one closest to the window and the complimentary biscuits without proper seniority, you were asking to be socially obliterated. In one infamous case from Bath, a woman known only as Miss L was coldly snubbed by her entire reading circle for booking her appointment exactly 10 minutes before her rival's wedding styling session, ensuring the bride-to-be had to wait. The fallout lasted months, possibly years. The papers never confirmed if Miss L survived the season. Stylists, meanwhile, became reluctant referees. Some tried to diffuse tension by assigning chairs diplomatically or loudly announcing that everyone is beautiful in their own way. Others stirred the pot, either for entertainment or revenge. A stylist once confessed to the hairdressers weekly that she would accidentally mix up curl formulas when two feuding clients booked the same day, then watch the sparks fly from under her fringe. Salon politics were delicate, dangerous, and delicious. And if you emerged from an appointment with perfect curls and your dignity intact, you were considered a master of the craft. But sometimes, even mastering the politics wasn't enough. Because the moment you left the salon, you were thrown into the public eye, judged, ranked, and, in some cases, scored. Welcome to the world of Victorian beauty contests, where women were paraded, critiqued, and crowned, all in the name of charm. You came to the county fair for jam tarts and modest socialising. You did not come to be publicly ranked like a prized heifer. But here you are, standing beneath a bunting-covered sign that reads, Annual Exhibition of Female Graces and Facial Symmetry. A man with a clipboard just asked for your full name, age, marital status, and whether your complexion is naturally bright or chemically enhanced. Your answer was, "Excuse me," but they wrote something down anyway. You're ushered into a row of chairs facing a panel of judges who appear to be the same people who once voted on marmalade. One of them squints at you through a monocle and murmurs, nose. Another marks something under fringe balance. Someone rings a bell. You're fairly certain you're being scored on your chin-to-ear ratio. To your left, a woman with suspiciously shiny hair is smiling like a taxidermy exhibit. To your right, a debutante is subtly trying to elbow you out of the line of sunlight. You regret everything, especially your shoes, and your bangs. Oh God, your bangs. Welcome to the Victorian Beauty Contest. May the most symmetrical survive. Victorian beauty contests emerged in the mid-19th century as a bizarre combination of fashion, social climbing, and casual objectification. These events range from local fairs and salon-sponsored showcases to national magazine competitions, where women submitted daguerreotypes and hoped their cheekbones would gain editorial favour. The rules were rarely consistent but always arbitrary. Contestants might be judged on skin clarity, posture, hairstyle execution, perceived moral character based entirely on eyebrow shape, or how well they presented while sitting in a chair. The Illustrated London News once described a seaside beauty competition in 1881 where the top prize went to a lady of such refinement she appeared to hover rather than sit. No one knows what that means. In some towns, beauty contests were salon-sponsored events, held by fashionable establishments to show off their best clients and boost business. Winners might receive a basket of soaps, a certificate of most graceful hair, or a modest cash prize, often just enough to buy another tub of lard-based pomade. The stakes were strangely high. A win could elevate your social standing, increase your marriage prospects, and earn your photograph a place in the window of a Bond Street boutique. A loss, however, might result in quiet shunning, whispered pity, or, worst of all, being described as very sweet in person. In 1873, the Times reported on a beauty contest scandal in which the runner-up accused the winner of using illegal rouge and a false hairpiece sewn from 3 other ladies. The accusation caused a minor riot, a broken tea set, and an official investigation that concluded absolutely nothing but made headlines for 2 weeks. Still, the beauty contest craze persisted, because in a world obsessed with appearances, there was no better proof of worth than winning a ribbon for your face. And speaking of ribbons, they weren't just worn, they were saved. Along with hair clippings, eyelashes, and the occasional eyebrow, Victorians had a knack for turning beauty into memorabilia. Which brings us to our next topic, the sentimental, slightly creepy world of hair collecting and keepsake culture. You came to have your fringe trimmed, not to leave with someone's grandmother's hair coiled into a bracelet. And yet, the stylist has just handed you a velvet box with the reverence usually reserved for royal decrees and whispered, "This is from my first client, she's passed." You open it. Inside is a delicate woven plait of chestnut hair tied with a black ribbon, mounted on what appears to be crushed velvet and a slight amount of gilt. You nod, because that seems appropriate. You say, "How lovely," because you don't know what else to say. The stylist beams. "It's real. I did the braiding myself. Took hours. I have a whole collection." You glance at the nearby shelf and realise, oh no, that none of these hair displays are made from mannequins. There's an entire gallery of dearly departed bangs mounted in shadow boxes, each one labelled in script. Agnes, 1871. Mother Tuesday. Mrs. Pettigrew with thanks. You're now fully surrounded by the ghosts of hairstyles past, and you're fairly certain one of them just blinked. Hair was everything in the Victorian era, not just a fashion statement, but a sentimental artifact. Unlike flowers, silk, or even photographs, hair was durable, personal, and ever-present. It was the one part of someone you could quite literally keep. Hair keepsakes were worn, displayed, gifted, and grieved over. Braided into lockets, rings, bracelets, or even wall art, these creations were often given as tokens of love or mourning. A mother might keep a curl from her child's first haircut. A widow might wear a ring braided from her husband's hair. A spurned lover might burn her beau's braid with dramatic flair and possibly mild arson. The art form was shockingly advanced. Entire hair wreaths were constructed from the tresses of multiple family members, often arranged into intricate floral designs and hung proudly on parlour walls. Think taxidermy, but emotionally unprocessed. A guide from 1867 titled Self-Instructor in the Art of Hairwork provided step-by-step instructions on creating these pieces at home, including advice on using hair from a known and reputable source, presumably to avoid confusion with rogue clippings. Some salons even offered specialised braiding services for memory tokens, charging by the inch and occasionally offering mourning discounts. In a letter published in the Ladies' Own magazine, one reader confessed, "I wore his braid at my wrist for 3 years. When I married another, I placed it into a drawer. When my son found it, I told him it was a bookmark. He believed me." Hair keepsakes weren't just limited to love and death. Sometimes they were traded between friends, sent in letters, or kept by stylists as proof of a good transformation. In a world without selfies, a braid was the next best receipt. But not all hair keepsakes were made posthumously, because sometimes the salon itself prepared you for death, literally. Which brings us to our next chapter. Mourning makeovers and the strange, serene world of funeral beauty treatments. You only came in to reschedule an appointment. That's it. One polite conversation, a little paper card, and maybe, a sample of the new lavender pomade. But now you're lying suspiciously flat on a salon chaise, being misted with rosewater by a woman in full black crepe, and someone just whispered the phrase, "Final touch-up for display purposes." You attempt to sit up. A hand gently presses your shoulder. "Shh," the stylist says softly. "It's best if you don't move. Just relax into your legacy." A large velvet curtain is drawn. A candle is lit. Another stylist begins softly brushing your hair like you're about to be auctioned to a very polite vampire. "We're giving you the eternal afternoon look," she says, fluffing your fringe. Soft, peaceful, slightly wistful, ideal for wakes, vigils, or well-lit weeping. On the table beside you is a labelled tray containing rouge for mortal pallor compensation, a fine-toothed comb for parting the veil and the scalp, and a sachet marked for chin shadows if needed. There's also a miniature fan to cool the complexion of the recently quiet. You begin to wonder if you've accidentally died. You glance at the woman in the chair next to you for reassurance, but she's been resting for 2 days and still has better posture than you. No one seems alarmed. They've done this before, a lot. You consider faking your own funeral just to get out of the appointment, but they're already curling your bangs with reverence, and someone just offered you a complimentary memento braid. You sigh. Not too hard. That's considered dramatic. Victorian society took mourning seriously, and that included how the dead looked when they left this world. Far from being a purely medical matter, post-mortem beautification was often a job for stylists and salon workers who were called upon to prepare the deceased for wakes, portraits, and those final respectful viewings. Hair was brushed, parted, or restyled entirely to match a person's best-known look, especially if they'd let themselves go in illness. Faces were cleaned, powdered, and even lightly rouged, with special care taken to ensure the deceased did not appear too cheerful. An 1879 guide to respectable mourning noted, "Nothing is more unbecoming than a corpse made to appear sprightly. Let dignity reign." Many salons offered mourning services alongside regular appointments. These might include hair washing and restyling for the deceased, curl revival for posthumous portraits, deathbed fringe smoothing, often billed as a calming gesture, and even the insertion of favourite accessories, bonnets, ribbons, or wedding combs, into final looks. In wealthier households, stylists were brought in privately, sometimes alongside the photographer, to prepare both the body and the room for a tasteful post-mortem image. One popular service offered by upper-class salons was the final arrangement, which included a light scalp massage, discreet brow darkening, and the positioning of hands around a small book or dried bouquet. Real newspaper accounts confirm the trend. The Morning Chronicle in 1868 detailed a fashionable mortuary salon in Chelsea, offering peaceful curl preservation and memorial braiding, with one stylist quoted saying, "It is our duty to present the face you would have wanted remembered, not the one illness has left us." Sometimes, the deceased's hair was also clipped, braided and given to the family, not as a spare wig, but as a mourning keepsake, later turned into jewellery or wall art. But the ritual wasn't only for the dead. Surviving family members often came to the salon for mourning makeovers, dark veils, pale powder, sombre hairstyles, all meant to show respect and reflect appropriate levels of heartbreak. Bonus points for looking elegantly devastated, and if you think all that death, hair and ritual didn't get a little superstitious, well, you haven't heard what Victorians believed about combs, scissors and curls falling on the floor. You're just here for a fringe trim and a little rouge. That's it. A quiet touch-up. A little time away from your dreadful cousin and the neighbour who keeps referring to your curls as confident. But the moment the stylist drops a lock of your hair on the floor, everything stops. She gasps. The other stylists freeze. One of them makes the sign of the cross using a curling iron. "Root side down," she whispers. "It fell root side down." You blink. Is that bad? The head stylist turns to the apprentice and mutters, "Fetch the salt." And the onion. You have questions. You ask none of them. They circle the fallen hair 3 times, sprinkle something over it that smells like pickled fear, and gently scoop it up with a ribbon that says, "Bless this mess." You are not reassured. Then a mirror cracks in the back room. A woman screams, someone faints. A drawer flies open on its own. A black cat, which no one had seen enter, sprints across the salon and disappears under the bonnet steamer. You're now wearing a protective sachet around your neck. Your hair is being braided into a luck knot just in case, and you've been instructed not to make direct eye contact with your reflection for 24 hours. You don't know what any of this means, but you nod respectfully because clearly something very bad almost happened. Possibly still is. Victorian beauty culture was drenched in superstition. Behind every fashionable updo was a swirling cloud of omens, folklore, and the deep, unshakable belief that bad luck had a flair for the dramatic. Dropping hair root side down meant illness, unless it was quickly turned over and blessed. Sweeping up hair too soon risked sweeping away the soul. Cutting hair on a Monday meant bad news by Friday. Cutting it on a Friday meant bad news immediately, and never, under any circumstances, should you allow your cut hair to be burned in a common fire. That was how curses were born. Stylists, being surrounded by all this flying hair and emotional volatility, became part-time sorcerers. They learned to mutter protective phrases while pinning braids, to sprinkle crushed rosemary inside comb drawers, and to always tie discarded hair into knots before disposing of it, lest a jealous spirit use it for romantic sabotage. Even the mirrors were dangerous. A cracked salon mirror wasn't just bad luck. It was a breach in the spiritual wallpaper, a portal through which misfortune, gossip, or your mother-in-law could sneak in. Stylists often hung lace or herbs over their mirrors overnight, to keep the mischief from setting. In Yorkshire, one salon claimed a mirror crack had caused 3 engagements to dissolve, a scandal to erupt, and a cake to fall in the same week. Certain combs were said to be unlucky. Certain brushes would only style hair clockwise. One stylist reportedly refused to use her silver scissors unless the moon was waxing. Otherwise the layers fall in rage. She was never questioned. Her clients were terrified of her. And of course, hair itself held meaning. Hair that curled on its own was thought to signal a deceitful nature. Hair that wouldn't hold a curl meant your fiancé was cheating. Hair that tangled easily, either you were cursed or your sister-in-law had been thinking negatively in your direction. It all sounds absurd, but in an age of mysterious illnesses, sudden death, and tight corsets, blaming your luck on a snip of hair was often the sanest explanation available, and yet no amount of superstition could save one demographic from hair-related despair. Because while women might fear a mirror crack or root-side drop, men feared something much worse: the slow, silent betrayal of their own scalp. Baldness wasn't just a beauty concern, it was a crisis, and the so-called solutions were even stranger than the superstitions. You're seated under the salon's drying dome, minding your own business, when a man bursts through the door like he's late to warn the Queen. His eyes are wide, his cravat is crooked. He slaps a newspaper onto the counter and demands, "Is it true you've regrown the hair of a bishop using only paste and electricity?" The stylist does not blink. She calmly wipes her hands on a lavender-scented towel and replies, "That depends. Did the bishop tithe?" The man rips off his top hat to reveal a dome so polished you could use it to signal ships. He points to his scalp. "Do something," he says. "Anything." She smiles and gestures to a waiting chair. "We'll begin with the bear grease. If that doesn't work, we'll move on to the lightning helmet." You try not to stare, but it's hard not to look when someone willingly straps a brass-tined apparatus to their head and starts humming softly, hoping for follicles. In the Victorian era, baldness wasn't a natural process. It was a moral failure, a signal to the world that you had lost not only hair, but perhaps control of your entire life. Thick hair meant virility, strength, and manly charisma. Thinning hair, the path to ruin. Naturally, desperate men were easy prey for miracle peddlers. Every newspaper and salon counter was littered with ads for miraculous tonics, electrocombs, scalp elixirs, and follicular fertilizers, most of which had more to do with flammable ingredients and wishful thinking than actual science. Popular baldness cures included beef marrow hair grease, which claimed to feed the root, but mostly fed your hat. Lining. Galvanic headbands, wired metal loops said to shock life back into sleeping follicles. Cantharides powder, made from powdered blister beetles to stimulate the scalp, although it mainly stimulated screaming. And of course the infamous magnetic hair invigorator, a sort of wire brush on a crank that looked like a mousetrap and sounded like revenge. One gentleman in the Times claimed to have regrown a full mane using nothing but a mixture of warm milk, cod liver oil, and the chanting of Latin phrases. He later admitted he had simply purchased a well-made wig and gone into hiding for 6 months. Salons capitalized on the shame with full restoration packages, which might include a hot towel wrap infused with onion extract, a firm but encouraging scalp massage with scented lard, and a hair optimism consultation, where the stylist gently suggested the client's head. Wanted to grow hair, it just needed emotional permission. But the truth was simple, nothing worked. Not the oils, not the zaps, not the scalp fumigations with burning rosemary. Still, men came. They bought bottles, wore contraptions, applied creams, and returned weekly for progress checks while pretending not to cry into their neckcloths. By the end of the century, a quiet resignation settled in. Wigs became more popular, hats grew taller, and baldness, while never quite embraced, became less of a tragedy and more of a gentleman's tax. After all, the hair may have gone, but at least he'd gone down greased and hopeful. From fringe to funeral, superstition to scandal, the Victorian hair salon was far more than a place for beauty. It was a microcosm of status, survival, and social theatre. Behind every curl was a ritual, behind every powder a quiet panic, and behind every mirror a reflection not just of appearance but of identity itself. Here, women gathered, men despaired, hair was honoured, burned, clipped, woven, worshipped, and occasionally weaponized. And through it all the salon stood, part sanctuary, part circus, styling not just heads, but entire lives, one absurd scented flaming pomade jar at a time. And now, as the final pin is placed, and the salon settles beneath moonlight and pomade, I hope this strange stroll through Victorian beauty lingers, like the scent of lavender lard in the air, or the soft curse of a fringe gone wrong. You've braved flaming tongs, cursed hair clippings, whispering wigs, and miracle tonics that tingled with lies. But now it's time to rest. The scissors are still, the mirrors are veiled, and for tonight the hair has been laid to peace. If you're still awake, congratulations. You've survived another evening inside history's most dangerous beauty ritual. Hit subscribe so we can unroll another strange curl of the past tomorrow night. And as you drift, the soft crackle of the fire will carry you deeper, far from bear grease scalp rubs and electrified hairbrushes, and gently into sleep.